What's going on, everybody? James Hancock here, back to review the season finale of Winning Time, The Rise of the Lakers Dynasty, a show that I liked so much and was so addicted to. I don't know if I can realistically expect to enjoy another show this year as much as I did this one, and I have to give a shout out to my friend Nick Berry, who first recommended that I get into this show, and I just was floored. I think I watched the first 7 episodes in one fell swoop, and the only downside was that I spent most of the show kind of depressed, wondering to myself, why can't more movies be as exciting and dynamic and just fucking fun as this show, where you've got great source material, the book Showtime by Jeff Pearlman, which I'm actually listening to on the audiobook right now, and you've got so much incredible action and great dialogue and great characters and sex and hell-raising and drama. It was so much goddamn fun from start to finish. This is one of those rare shows where you will just sit around in excitement, eagerly anticipating the next chapter. But the good news is that there's so much history to draw upon, they could easily run this show for 5, 6, 7 seasons. Not that every single season of the Lakers throughout the 80s is equally compelling as the 79-80 season, but there's a ton of good material coming our way. I mean, can you imagine how much fun it's going to be watching them playing the Pistons in the late 80s? I mean, Jesus Christ. And the irony is that this enthusiasm is coming from somebody who I would characterize their interest in basketball as indifferent, where my family, they're obsessed with basketball. It's their first and only religion. I have 6 siblings who went to Carolina, 2 of which are still there. All they talk about is Tar Heel basketball. But for whatever reason, from the time I was a little kid onward, I just was never into it, even though I was forced to play it from 3rd to 8th grade. And in that time, in spite of 6 years on the court and 3 summer camps, I never scored a single basket in a single game. I was short, I was uncoordinated, I was emaciated, and I just wasn't into it. But I mean, look at this picture of me from the fall of 1990. Are you going to pass the ball to that kid when a big game is on the line? I don't think so. But even though I don't follow the sport of basketball, the only sport I follow is MMA, I do love drama. So when something cool comes along like The Last Dance, I was enthralled. I saw it twice. Or when it comes to Magic Johnson, there was a really cool documentary about 12 years ago called Magic and Bird, A Courtship of Rivals. I watched it 3 times. So I can get into history and drama and action. I just don't follow the sport of basketball. However, there's so much about this show, this topic, and the season finale that just demand and command our attention. It's very easy to fall under its spell, so I'm just going to call attention to a few of the ingredients that I found very compelling, and my hope is that'll persuade some people who are on the fence to check out this show, which I think, once again, is going to end up being one of the most entertaining and memorable shows of 2022. So let's talk a little bit about that season finale, where we all knew that the Lakers would end up being the 1980 NBA World Champions, but there were some great dramatic beats and just really, chill-inducing moments along the way that really made the episode satisfying. It opens up really strong with Kareem kicking all kinds of ass, but then getting hurt, but then finishing out the game with a taped-up ankle. And what was cool is seeing how later on, he and Magic had this incredible moment in the car where Kareem basically admits that he was about ready to hang up his Spurs, but then suddenly this kid came along with all smiles and all hugs and all enthusiasm, and it reignited his love of the game. And I think that's one of the cool things about this show is how it identifies some of the key drivers of success, and that can be competition or inspiration or whatever the case might be. Like at the very end of the episode, when Magic learns that Larry Bird beat him for Rookie of the Year, but with a vote of 63-3, he's pissed. Like, he is tired and he's exhausted and he's ready to hang it up. But when he learns that, he's like, game on. But same thing here, like Kareem, who's a much older player, I found that scene really touching, when earlier in the season, they nearly came to blows over their different attitudes toward the sport. And speaking of competition, there's this great little shot toward the end of the episode where we see Larry Bird's reaction to Magic winning, where he doesn't kind of, huff and puff or throw a temper tantrum. He doesn't get jealous, whatever. He just goes outside and he starts practicing. In the end, that's what will get you those rings on your hand, practicing. And I think looking ahead to future seasons, that's going to be the most satisfying aspect of the show, is seeing that rivalry intensifying and deepening, and then eventually reaching the point where they become friends, like as was perfectly illustrated in that great documentary about them about 12 years ago. After they do this, I think it was in 1984 or 1985 Converse commercial together. Magic's invited to lunch at Larry's mother's place, and from that point on, while they weren't necessarily like buddy-buddy, but there was this growing rapport and respect. But obviously, this is still early days where we see just how heated that rivalry is, and that nothing illustrates that better than when Magic's basically imagining a scene in his head where Larry Bird's on the couch just talking shit. I was just absolutely howling, seeing just how much headspace Bird is occupying in Magic. But this episode had so many great little details. And one of my favorites was this moment when they're arriving in Philadelphia and you see this sign that fans holding up that says, "Bird sucks and Magic swallows." And I just found it so refreshing that this show consistently throughout the whole season was very honest about just how gnarly the shit talking can get between diehard fans. And in today's politically sensitive climate, I'm sure there are people at HBO who would have been totally happy if the show decided to avoid those details. But for me as a fan of this show, I'm glad that this show completely embraces that very honest, refreshing approach to basically fan culture. And toward the end of the episode, there was one great dramatic beat after another. I love seeing how conflicted Magic is when he's basically approached with the idea of being MVP instead of Kareem, since Kareem's at home and they basically want somebody on TV. And just seeing Kareem's reaction to Magic on TV, where he is stunned into silence, but he doesn't wallow in his anger. Instead, he decides to do a good deed. He goes and pays a visit to Spencer Haywood, and Spencer Haywood is in the absolute depths of the worst kind of drug addiction imaginable, but we see that Kareem at a minimum can help raise him up out of just the darkest period imaginable. In any event, long story short, that was a very satisfying season finale. I can't wait for season 2. But now let me get into some of the many reasons why I love this season across the board. I think in the end, one of the main strengths of this show is the writing. I mean, the writing has been so consistently strong from start to finish because you've got Rodney Barnes, Max Bornstein, and Jim Hecht contributing to pretty much every single episode. And if you compare that to some other shows, a lot of times great shows out there will almost feel like they have an identity crisis where the different writers on the staff are kind of pulling it in different directions where they're not on the same page. This show has a very strong storytelling voice, even if the director is constantly changing from people like Adam McKay to Jonah Hill to Tanya Hamilton to whomever. But no matter how good your writing staff might be, it doesn't mean a damn thing if you don't have the right cast that can bring it to life. And goddamn, this show just has a murderer's row of just brilliant acting talent who brought so many of these historical figures to life in such vivid detail. And I mean, obviously, Quincy Isaiah's Magic Johnson, it's almost uncanny where it's like, at times it's almost hard for me to remember what Magic Johnson really looks like and talks like when, and now like Quincy Isaiah is in my head, but he just absolutely stole the show. But I think my dark horse candidate for my favorite performance of the season has to be Jason Clarke as Jerry West. And I don't know why. This is going to end up being, I think for me, the funniest performance I'm likely to see all year. His rage is just divine, and I love his mood swings and the highs and the lows and how he doesn't really care about happiness. Like, fuck happiness. What he likes is victory. He likes winning, and it might be his finest hour in a very long, prolific career. I mean, Jason Clarke's done a lot of good stuff, but the one line that really got to me is when they're playing in Boston that one time, and he's like, "Paul Revere should have slept in. Let the British burn this fuckhole to the ground." I mean, his hostility is just it's just fantastic. And I love how even like he has like a trophy on his wall that's like talking shit to him about how he was a miserable prick even when he was winning. And so yeah, when it comes to just pure divine comedy, Jason Clarke, A+, 100% across the board. But right up there with them is John C. Reilly as Jerry Buss. And it's almost like every single time John C. Reilly was on screen throughout the season, it's like he brought a little bit of Boogie Nights into this show. I mean, obviously he was not the star of Boogie Nights, but he's one of the stars. He was incredible in that. And it's a similar time period. I mean, almost basically, yeah, they overlap. They dovetail perfectly. But he just brought in that sleazy, just showbiz energy, which I just found so irresistible. And a strong contender for one of the funniest scenes all season, but also one of the foulest all season, is when his daughter's looking at him eating chicken. And as he's sitting there just stuffing his face and licking his fingers, she basically starts envisioning him in the middle of this kind of greasy orgy. And I was just screaming with laughter. And she ends up like spontaneously vomiting all over the place. I mean, once again, why are movies not using scenes like this? It's just criminal that we live in a world where most mainstream movies are made for a childlike sensibility, where storytelling gold like this can only be found on the small screen. And it was just so cool how his character almost kind of is like guiding the audience through the story and talking to us. I love how like he'll hit the cameraman and things like that. Yeah, watching the show and watching all the trials and tribulations of him as a businessman and all the way that's all the like his appetite for risk. It was almost like you're force feeding the audience to just eat stress every single episode. I don't particularly like stress, but you have to always kind of keep reminding yourself in the back of your mind while you're watching the show, all this ends well. Like Magic Johnson, he ended up winning a lot of rings. Like everything ends up going just fine for these characters. Like Pat Riley, even though it's easy to worry about the fate of Adrian Brody over the course of the season, we all know that Pat Riley ended up becoming this legendary coaching figure. And Adrian Brody, he just gives you one slam dunk after another throughout the whole season. And he's been doing incredible work for decades at this point, but huge fan of his work as Pat Riley. Loved Gabby Hoffman as Claire Rothman. Really enjoyed seeing Tracy Letts as Jack McKinney. That story was just so sad, but one of the bleakest, darkest moments all season is when he has that bike wreck. And just prior to that, seeing how he's like in that flow state and like genuinely floating as he's working on his different plays. And he's a marvelous actor and a really interesting storyteller in his own right, but I thought he might be a strong contender for my dark horse favorite performance as well, right there alongside Jason Clarke. But I was so impacted by his crash scene that I ended up buying this fancy schmancy bike helmet because I live in New York and I ride bikes all the time. And the last thing I want to do is rub off half my face and have a swollen brain due to my not wearing a helmet. So thank you to Winning Time for finally persuading me that I need to invest in a helmet. But I do need to give a special shout out to Solomon Hughes as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, because of all the parts that different actors get to play in this, that character is one of the more difficult ones to play because he was so multifaceted, and the book does a really good job of talking about his conflicted feelings towards celebrity and sports and politics and race. I mean, it's just a very still is to this day, a very complicated man who excites a lot of controversy and negative reactions sometimes. And I feel like Solomon Hughes brings all those different aspects of his personality vividly to life. So in general, I feel like he did a brilliant job from start to finish. But in the end, I think what I responded to more than anything is that this is a show that recognizes that adults who like sports like their entertainment to be visceral. They want it to be intense. They want it to be exciting. They want to see situations like a girl flashing her tits to Magic Johnson with Larry Bird written across her chest. We live in an era where we have so much content coming our way all day, every day. If you want to cut through all that white noise, well, then you got to really do something to kind of grab your audience by like their shirt and be like, look, like watch this fucking show. It's fucking great. And I think this show makes a case for itself pretty much every single episode. So if somebody who doesn't even like basketball is this into this show, I can't even imagine what real basketball fans must be feeling. Or who knows, maybe they find the actual genuine sport to be so fascinating they don't even need a show like this. I really don't know. I mean, I don't watch any fictionalized shows about the world of MMA because the world of MMA is plenty exciting on its own between the pay-per-views and all the various commentary and podcasts out there. So all I need is the sport and my needs are covered. But when it comes to pure raw filmmaking, this show is doing so many things right, like cutting between the different video and film formats. I absolutely love that. And I love the way characters can kind of break the fourth wall. Like when Larry Bird is on the TV screen and he looks right at Magic Johnson, he starts talking shit. Speaking of Larry Bird, I went down a crazy rabbit hole just watching Larry Bird highlights of him talking shit and doing crazy plays. And once again, I don't like basketball, but I spent a good hour or two just watching Larry Bird highlights because of this show. And speaking of all these crazy filmmaking techniques, I love how they include animation. I mean, just once again, I really can't sing this show's praises enough. I mean, is all of it created equal? Of course not. I mean, they're basically taking a history book and then padding it out and fleshing it out with a lot of personal narratives, and some of the subplots and secondary and like third tier characters aren't as compelling as others, but I can totally take a little fat on the bone if the real meat of the story is still there. So it's kind of a miracle. Like when you see the format of the book and then the way they were able to take like the beginning of the book and then decompress it into an entire season. Like I said, we've got so much cool stuff to look forward to. And I hope they'll continue to keep giving us cameos of figures like Jack Nicholson and Richard Pryor. It's just such a crazy period in Los Angeles history. And I love how this is where showbiz and movies and sports and entertainment, how they all just come colliding together into this irresistible story. And I'm looking online now and I see that after episode 5, HBO was so happy with the number of viewers each episode was generating, they went ahead and renewed it for season 2. So high five to HBO for getting behind this show. High five to all the writers and directors who are part of the team. High five to the cast. And high five to the man who wrote this book in the first place, good old Jeff Pearlman. But I guess the real high five should go to the original athletes who created this compelling story in the first place. I mean, while it's fun to see Solomon Hughes as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, in the end, it's the real Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and the real Magic Johnson and like the real Pat Riley. It's the real people who made history, which led to the book, which led to the show. So anyway, high five to everybody involved. But I hope y'all have enjoyed this review. I would love to hear people's thoughts down below if you are a diehard Lakers fan or a diehard basketball fan. And if you're not a basketball fan like me, love to hear if you find the show as compelling as I do. So once again, thanks to my buddy Nick Berry for insisting that I check this show out, but I hope you've enjoyed this review. If so, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and I hope everyone has an amazing week, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.